It is the absolute best. It's a national holiday, is it not? What better way to spend? If it's Christmas morning, there's nothing better than Christmas Eve. Well, Christmas morning's pretty special. But Christmas Eve is so special because you've got the anticipation, the excitement, the everything that goes into knowing that it is upon you. And so you go, and whether you go to a church service or whether you go to Christmas lights viewing or whether you go and you have coffee with the family and fruitcake or lay out everything for Santa at the chimney, whatever it might be, Christmas Eve, you try to do something to get you in the mood for Christmas. And last night, to get in the mood for this day, the greatest day, one of two of them on like probably 5 days of the calendar year in sports, that is special. Opening round day of the NCAA tournament, the field of 64, games getting underway, live look-ins. Let's go over here. There's 9 games going on theoretically at one time. It's 10:30, and you're like, oh, my gosh, I forgot. There's another game out west just tipping off. I'm up till 1. Let's go. What better way to get ready for all of that than what happened last night? And it wasn't pretty. It looked like it was going to be a lump of coal in the stocking for, fruit in your stocking for the better part of the, first 90% of last night's game. But I'm watching the Dallas Mavericks, who have 8 available players. I got in the car on the way home after the game, and I'm listening to Mark Boyle, and he's listing, as he does, the statistics of what everybody did in the game. And he says, for the Pacers, they had 15 available players, 11 of which played, all of which that played scored. And he's listing off the scores, and it takes him a while. It took me from, even in traffic, around City Market area to probably 16th and Delaware, while he was listing just the scores for the Pacers alone. Then he gets to the Mavericks. They had 8 available players. All 8 scored, and it took him like 30 seconds to read off who scored and what they did. I thought Dallas, there was a Maverick fan sitting behind me last night. Lived in Cincinnati. I talked to him. He drove over from Cincinnati for the game. He's a native of Dallas. He stood up.
Mac Engel?
Mac
He
Engel
moved to Cincinnati?
He was born in Cincinnati. Nice. Good recall there, Eddie. This guy behind me stood up the entire second half, and with every play for the Mavericks was like, good job, good job. I mean, he was a good fan. He was not obnoxious, but after a while, when it was otherwise silent because everybody was incredulous as to what was happening with the lowly Mavericks, and I say lowly meaning just because of attrition. And as I was watching that game, I was thinking to myself, this is the fickle nature of the NBA. Giveth and taketh away. The Pacers go into a game in Minnesota where they're shorthanded, where they have roster attrition all over the place, and yet they managed to get a win. And what a great win. But that would be immediately balanced out and erased if they were to then allow a Dallas team under the exact same circumstances to come in and do the same thing to Indiana. And it looked that way for a long time. And then the last 3 or 4 minutes were kind of this blur, but what it came down to was the Pacers were down. Eddie, you can help me fill in the blanks here because it happened very quickly. The Pacers got down by as many in the late portions of the game. They were down by like 7, and then it was kind of in that 5-3 category. They had a late situation where Andrew Nembhard was at the free throw line. And I love Andrew Nembhard. But in late game free throws, Andrew Nembhard worries me. The funny thing about it is, as Andrew Nembhard worries you with late game free throws, Andrew Nembhard is equally as reliable at late game 3-point shots. And I don't mean where you design a play to go to Andrew Nembhard. I mean Andrew Nembhard's at its best when you know you need a 3, you work it to Siakam or Halliburton. Halliburton didn't play last night, but you know what I mean. Or Nesmith, or even Toppin, and they miss a three, and it caroms out, and there's a loose ball, and then T.J. McConnell ends up with it, and he drives around the lane, and the shot clock's running down, and there's 9 seconds left in the game and 3 seconds left on the shot clock, and, oh, man, the only guy open is Nembhard, and he's 3 feet behind the line, and you go to Nembhard, and he lets a three go, and he hits it. That's where he's at his best. I said to the woman next to me, when Nembhard went to the line, I said, my worry here is he's going to miss this free throw. And he did. And then there was this flurry of activity and steals and whatever else, and Nembhard hits a three that gives them the lead. And I said to her, it's almost as if when no one's looking, he's at his best, and when all eyes are on him, he's at his worst.
That happened in the Milwaukee game. He had the back-to-back wide-open threes and missed them. Went to the line with a chance, I think, to tie, and he split the 2 free throws.
And yet there are other games that you look at. I mean, last year in the playoffs against Milwaukee, right, where he hits like the 35-footer. Obviously, as a rookie against Los Angeles, what's that?
New York.
New York. That's so sorry. New York.
At home, yeah.
Last year, or as a rookie against the Lakers, he had a game winner and a prolific game that he had where like no one was like really looking to see him do that.
He had another one against Golden State as well.
Correct.
It was very similar to the Minnesota game the other night. The Pacers were down, I think, numerous starters. They had O'Shea Brissett, Kiefer Sykes, and Andrew Nembhard as like 3 of the 5 starters. It was wild. He had like 30 points and 10 rebounds.
Yeah, when in those situations, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, so they end up winning the game last night, and it was huge. It was a huge win for the Pacers, not because it's against Dallas, who's, vying for the last playoff spot in the West, but rather simply because of what they didn't have. It was a huge win because it was a huge win because you were avoiding a bad loss because of what Dallas didn't have, is what I meant to say. Because if they lose that game, then it all of a sudden takes away essentially all of the good that happened in Minnesota. But they didn't, and they end up getting the win. It was awesome. Got home then just in time to catch Xavier kind of in a flurry of late rallies as well game, hold off Texas. So the field is now set. And as I was watching that, Texas and Xavier, I then was enlightened to, and I want to apologize here for this. Eddie, if you have the clip from yesterday where Darren DeVries, and I'll call for it in a second here, talked about he talked about the process with Indiana and the process of when contact was made and everything else. When he spoke yesterday, and I'm not saying this by any stretch of the imagination as an excuse, because perhaps I erred yesterday, but rather an explanation. We went on early yesterday in order to carry that press conference, and then by the time he got up to the podium, it was hovering right around noon. So I'm looking at the clock, and I know that we've got to break in to do the top of the show, and there are a lot of arrows moving past, and I'm trying to listen intently to everything that he's saying and write down what he's saying and pay attention word by word by word. But I didn't have time to then review his comments because we went right into the show. So I'm listening to him and then went right into the show, and then we did the show yesterday. And I think I missed a detail. And I hate that more than life itself, and I want people to know that certainly we try to uncover every angle of a story and discuss it if it is something that is in discussion on this show. This is, and I don't think by any stretch of the imagination it is insipid. I don't think it's illegal. I don't think it's immoral, but I think it's interesting. But this is something that came predominantly from the West Virginia fan base yesterday. And West Virginia fans are the ones that really seemingly noticed and discovered this nuance that I did not catch. I don't know that I even caught it when it was said because I think we had things going on and I wasn't listening that intently to what was happening, right? But do we have Darren DeVries yesterday talking about the process and the timeline with Indiana? This was yesterday in the press conference.
What I loved about how the process played out was, from our very first conversation, there was certainly, we mentioned the word alignment, but there was an alignment to my vision their vision, and how do we make this go together. And I think that's very important, because the way we want to build this program and build it to a level that is sustainable and be at a very high level, there are certain things that we feel, that I feel is important in our program. And I thought those all aligned with the administration as we went through that process. So, getting into more details later about the offense, defense, all those type of things. But more importantly, that the process, we can't cheat the process. The work has to go into it. The type of players that we bring into our program have to match what we're about. I think the majority of your winning takes place on the very front end. Your coaching staff, the players you bring into your program, what are their qualities? What's important to them? Are they self-starters? Are they self-motivated? Are they team players? Those type of things are all important to us. And as that process played out, it was clear and evident to me that this was going to be a great fit, for myself, for our family, and can't be more excited to be here.
Okay, there was another clip, we're going to find it here, where he says, during the process, they allowed me to then focus on my season with West Virginia, which I appreciated, but I was watching what they were doing. And we'll find that exact clip. But the point that I'm making here is it does appear when Indiana had their coaching vacancy, essentially once it was determined that Mike Woodson was retiring, I'm using somewhat air quotes there, that at that point it is believed that Indiana did a coaching search, which began with Brad Stevens, that goes without saying, and they hired a coaching search firm. But the words from DeVries appear as though there may have been discussion when both schools were in the Bahamas and an understanding moving forward. This is either earlier or later in the press conference here.
Yeah, and obviously the process, is the process on how it plays out. And, as you're going through their season, they were, very respectful of making sure that my focus continued to be on our team, and certainly appreciated that.
I don't know how else to take that other than when they were in the Bahamas, they basically, and I don't think that they offered him a job or had an agreement there, but clearly he was well aware of what the possibility was when he says, I appreciate that they allowed me to focus on my season. What else would he focus on? Now, the other thing that becomes the curveball or the interesting aspect of this, it was very shortly after that where his son, a nearly 22-point per game scorer and the two-time Missouri Valley Player of the Year who was playing for West Virginia, it was very shortly after that Darren DeVries' son was then stepped aside. Now, he had injury, but was determined to be out for the year, which would get him a year of medical redshirt eligibility for this coming season, which would be for Indiana. That I'm not in any way, shape, or form saying that that any of that is illegal or immoral. I think it's fascinating because all I'm pointing out is that does lead credence to West Virginia people can argue and complain and cry about that till the cows come home. That's the ultimate compliment to Indiana. To Indiana, the ultimate compliment to Scott Dolson and the Indiana Athletic Department and the Indiana fan base, the ultimate compliment is they got a guy that, by all account and appearance, the school where he's coming from was desperately trying to hold on to and is a scorned lover for the fact that he left. I mean, when if someone were to, when you, in any situation that you walk into, you want people to say, man, I felt like you completely, I was so disappointed when you left, as opposed to, yeah, I mean, if Indiana wants him, have at. But the West Virginia side, that's the whole thing, is Indiana tampered with him. I think that's the thing. They feel like Indiana tampered. I don't think that. What I'm saying is I find it interesting because it proves two things. Number one, that even in 1 year, he had made a mark in West Virginia where people liked the way and the direction of their program. That's good news for Indiana. Number two, it would appear that the other names that we talked about, Ben McCollum, Chris Beard, I told you from day one, I don't know that Indiana even contacted Chris Beard. Chris Beard was never a candidate for Indiana. But Brad Stevens, Dusty May, did they go to him and say, look, we are very, very interested here in having the conversation with you, because they had to have kicked the tires on Dusty May and Brad Stevens. At the very least, they got Dusty May paid more money at Michigan. And in Brad Stevens' case, the thing that is also fascinating with all of this is that I had told you folks, that sounds condescending. I had mentioned here on the show that what I had been told was that Brad Stevens, and I have no idea if Brad Stevens even had interest in the Indiana job. I will tell you that a year ago, Jake, why are you talking about Brad Stevens? Indiana has their coach. Let it go. I get it. But a year ago, Brad Stevens and people that I know that know Brad Stevens well had said that for the very first time they had the feeling that Brad Stevens, the door could possibly be opened to coach in college. And then this year, when the Indiana job was very clearly going to be open, the same people told me, look, I think there might have been a window, but I don't think it's now. I think the window's closed. And a big part of that, I was told, was because the Boston Celtics were for sale and that Brad Stevens had a financial investment, if you will, or vest, or whatever portion that would benefit him upon a sale of the Celtics, but for it to be vested, he had to be an employee at the time of sale. I have no idea the accuracy of that, and I'm certainly a financial moron, but it is fascinating that the day after Indiana officially announces their hire, it just so happened, and yes, I understand, these two in the timeline are in no way, shape, or form connected. I get it. But it is amazing that this morning the news comes that the Boston Celtics have sold for $6.1 billion. So now on this, is today the 20th or the 19th, Eddie?
It is the 20th.
So the 20th or 21st?
20th.
Okay.
Tomorrow's the 21st.
So on this, the 20th day of March in 2025, I'm going to go ahead and float this out there. You ready? Brad Stevens is now, if he's going to leave the Boston Celtics and is open to coaching again in college basketball, Brad Stevens will eventually return to Butler. I have nothing to base that on. Nothing at all. Nothing. Other than he's presumably close with Thad Matta, and Thad Matta is returning to Butler, and I know, and I love Thad Matta, and I think he's a hell of a coach. But if Thad Matta, for health reasons, needs to leave Butler, I think Brad Stevens has a great love for Butler, so too to his wife. His daughter next year, I think, is going to be graduating from high school if it isn't this year. And so I just thought it'd be fun on radio to say, you know what, let's just get the conversation started. Brad Stevens back to Butler. Comes back, he backs at the Brinks truck in Boston, or he may be in Boston for the next 20 years, because why would you leave? They've got Jaylen Brown. They've got Jason Tatum. They've got a wonderful roster. They've got a ring. They may get a second. Who knows? But it's certainly fun to talk about, right? Eddie, you actually were working the game last night for the Pacers, correct?
Yes. Yes, I was. Just like almost every other night.
At what point in that game did you feel confident that, in fact, the Pacers were going to win? Or at what time did you come to the conclusion that the Pacers actually may lose or were going to lose?
I thought they were going to lose when they got up to, I think it was 10 or 11, with 6 minutes left. Dallas went up 11, and Pacers just simply had no answers for the Dallas offense. They couldn't get stops. They had to rely late on turnovers and offensive fouls. That's how they got their stops, because they went, I think Pat Boylan had this, that Dallas did not miss a shot in the final 4 minutes and 50-something seconds until the very, very, very end when P.J. Washington took the three-pointer with less than a second left.
So what I noticed was this. Their defense, I noticed this last night, and maybe this is something I should have noticed earlier. But what I noticed last night about the Pacers' defense, especially late in that game, Aaron Nesmith, Benedict Mathurin. Kudos to Benedict Mathurin. because midway through the fourth, each time they needed a bucket, Benedict Mathurin is definitely one guy that he gets the ball at the top of the wing, and it's like you can just tell. It's auto lock. Like, this dude is going to score. His job is to score, and he's not necessarily a great pull-up jumper, but in terms of getting to the lane and contorting his body and either getting himself to the free throw line or scoring, Benedict Mathurin is Bedford North Lawrence Damon Bailey. He's going to drive. He's going to pump fake at the he plays taller than he is. He's going to go to the free throw line, and he's going to get points. But I thought late in the game, Benedict Mathurin's perimeter defense and the tenacity with which he was guarding way high outside the three-point line, along with Aaron Nesmith and Pascal Siakam, for that matter, as well. They did a really good job of locking down Dallas at about the 28-foot mark, especially on the wings. But what Dallas did a really good job of then was basically curling players through in the mid-range area and into the lane, making one pass, and then completely exploiting the fact that Indiana had their defensive pressure up high, and so the down low was wide open. And Dallas was able to take advantage of that routinely. The number of, oh gosh, there's only 7 seconds left on the shot clock, and this guy looks trapped, and then one pass and layup. That seemingly happened for the entire third and fourth quarter. It was kind of maddening, if you really want to know the truth. And then late in the game, I think, and I kept waiting for Dallas's legs to turn to lumber. Because that's what happens when you play 8 guys, right? And you have no rotations. But, you know, I turned around, and I very rarely do this. But the Mavericks guy behind me, I turned around to him afterwards and said, you know what? I'm glad that the Pacers won that game, and in the last minute and a half, they did every single thing they needed to do to win that game. They scratched and clawed for that game. But the Dallas Mavericks should have won that game last night. They deserved to win that game last night.
Same with Minnesota. Like, the Timberwolves gave the game to Indiana with Anthony Edwards just jacking him threes when he couldn't hit the broadside of the barn.
Correct. Dallas deserved to win that game last night. And the guy was like, you know what? Considering everything that they're going through right now, he's like, I was pleased with it. He was a cool dude. I said, you know, have a good drive back to Cincinnati, whatever. And he was wearing a sweet. I didn't like the Mavericks jerseys. Did you like their jerseys, their uniforms? They were white with like a transparent silverish lettering. Just go back to the royal blue. The royal blue and the sea green. I'm not even a Seahawks fan. I just love the colors of the Seattle Seahawks and that logo. So I had this shirt on that I'm wearing today because I love the colors of it.
I actually thought it was like a nice look. It's crisp. You got the white and the silver.
It is, but it's not crisp in comparison to what they left behind. That's my point. The old school blue, and I'm talking old school. I'm talking like when Jason Kidd was a Mav, Jamal Mashburn, that era Mav. The guy had on that jersey, I think it might have been a Kidd jersey. It was pretty sweet. Jim Jackson was on that team as well. IndyCar is in Thermal. What exactly is Thermal? Well, it's an auto club. Where is it? It's near Palm Springs, California, but not really in Palm Springs. I'm intrigued. Tell me more. Well, I will do that, and I'll do it with the television voice for the NTT IndyCar Series. Will Buxton from Fox joins us next. I think we got an Axel Foley laugh in there. Nicely done, Eddie. Will Buxton, by the way, scheduled to join us. We'll see if that comes to fruition because we forgot sometimes we need to check to see if we paid the international phone bill. That's always the challenge. Although I guess I'll have Eddie. We'll do this live producing on the air, which is always fun. Purdue getting underway in their NCAA tournament start today, obviously. It would probably be smart of me to counter-produce that, if you will, but I'm not naive. I realize that people are aware that they are playing in the tournament itself. As for IndyCar being in Thermal, the Thermal Auto Club is, last year this was an exhibition race. And by that, I mean it was a race that did not count towards the season itself. They did essentially kind of like an all-star race format. The weekend was won by, or the final event was won by Alex Palou. And, of course, Palou won the season opener in St. Petersburg. It is now a regular race event on the schedule, on the calendar. And that means that, I think the stakes are a little bit different. I think last year teams kind of were going through it just to kind of feel it out and find out what the track was like, knowing that eventually it was going to be a main stop on the circuit. And now it is exactly that. I was not there last year, so I'm very curious to see what it's going to be like. I think that, as I had mentioned before, tire degradation is a storyline when it comes to IndyCar, and I know a lot of people don't know what that means. That simply means preserving your tires and trying to get them to not, as we call it, fall off or lose traction over the course. That would – hang on just a second. Eddie, he just texted me. Why don't you text him and give him the hotline number? Sorry for producing live on the air there, folks. When you are working it and you just text him at this number right here. Anyway, apparently the phone drops when Will Buxton answers, by the way. But when you're driving in the car and you have tire degradation, that means that the quality of the tire goes away, and now all of a sudden you are like slipping and sliding all over the place. And the softer compound tires that they use, those are the ones with a green or a red ring on them. They are the drivers have to use them at least once over the course of the race. And when that happens, they have to come in once the tires fall off. The softer compound tires give you more speed immediately when you go out, but then you only get a couple of laps before they start to go away and you're sliding all over the place. That's one of the storylines I think that's going to be the storyline in Thermal, because this is a track that we're not overly familiar with, and so therefore they don't know exactly what to plan for in terms of the tire strategy, the grip, and etc. So that's one of the things that we will certainly keep an eye on, along with keeping an eye on the phone lines right now to see if Will Buxton calls in or does not call in. As for going back to last night with the Pacer game and putting a tie on that for now, I thought that because it was, again, it was a win that in a perfect situation, what I was hoping for was, because they come back tonight to play Brooklyn, my hope was that they would have gotten out. Once they got out to, at one point the Pacers were up, I think, 15 or 16 in the late first half, and I thought, okay, Dallas is completely out of gas here. And so as a result of that, I'm hoping that the Pacers can get out to a big lead and then rest everybody in the second half and get them fresh for tonight's game against Brooklyn. And lo and behold, it looked like that was going to happen. And that would have been the strategy, because you've got to – I think they're in the situation now. When you look at where Milwaukee is, you look at where Detroit is, and you look at where the Pacers are, then you have to absolutely make sure that you're taking advantage of each and every situation. So you get that win last night. Then what you want to do in getting that win last night is build off of that instead of giving it away in tonight, where you have a situation where you're going to be worn down. And I so wanted to make sure that they last night maybe put themselves in position to be able to rest and be fresher tonight. But that wasn't the case, so it'll be interesting to see what happens with Brooklyn. And that's another one that, because you've got Brooklyn now not in back-to-back nights, but back-to-back games, do you get out to a big lead with that? And then we'll see what happens with it. But I thought last night Nembhard at the free throw line was worrisome, and then Nembhard hitting that three was unbelievable. Eddie looks very frustrated. Are you not in engineering? Did we need, you know what I just figured out? Did we not pay off the folks at Radio Shack? Did we forget to get that extra part on the line? Is that what happened?
I'm not sure. Trying to figure it out.
So no will is what we're getting at, right? No will, no worries. Tony E's going to join us, by the way, 2 o'clock today. Taylor Tannebaum is going to join us at 2:30 to talk about the ACC. ACC with 4 in, Duke, Carolina, Clemson, and Louisville. The question there then becomes, does, by any chance, Carolina now, after their huge win in the opening round game, do they maintain that, or is that it? Carolina made a statement. They heard you. Carolina heard all of you. You don't think we're in. You think Indiana and West Virginia should be in. Indiana and West Virginia actually are sitting there having conversation with one another about the coach. And maybe Carolina says, okay, we proved it. We beat San Diego State by 40 out of the mighty Mountain West. So maybe now they pack it in. Or maybe Carolina does like UCLA did and does like Virginia Commonwealth did and catches lightning in a bottle. Hey, Jake, this from Matthew in Maine. Why are you saying Brooklyn on the radio? Aren't you supposed to be pronouncing it Brooklyn? Yes.
No.
Yes.
No.
Oh, it's the best.
No.
That all comes from 1994 in New York. My parents come out. We did one of the double-decker bus tours. You ever done a double-decker bus tour anywhere?
No.
You're a little bit embarrassed because you know what people think when they see the double-decker bus tour go by? It's like, oh, look, a bunch of tourists, right? It's like when you're on the double-decker bus tour anywhere, you kind of feel like you're the animal inside the zoo exhibit, right? Like that's what you feel like. You're the animal inside the zoo exhibit and everybody's looking at you. And so when that happens, everybody's looking at you and you're up there on the double-decker bus, and so you're trying to make the most of it. So my parents and I are doing it, and you actually do learn fun stuff. But the guy that was giving us the tour, when he pointed out where Brooklyn was, kept calling it Brooklyn. On our left is Brooklyn. And my parents thought it was the funniest thing ever. And he was not – I would not make fun of that if it was someone's natural accent from having English as a second language. That was not the case. The guy was like me or Eddie. But he just kept calling it Brooklyn, and we thought it was hilarious. And so – as a result, I've always called it Brooklyn. Pacers and Brooklyn tonight. Now, Eddie, when do they then play Brooklyn after that? Brooklyn.
They play them again on Saturday.
And that is where?
Here. They're in the middle of a 5-game homestand. So
the Nets are just hanging out. The Nets are taking up temporary residence in Indianapolis. We'll see if we can get a hold of Will. We got to get a hold of the folks at Radio Shack and see if they paid that international card. We'll check in on it next. naturally speaking, Eddie Garrison, for coming up with all of Eddie actually did, and this stuns me. During that break, Eddie had time to leave here, which is impressive enough, drive to Radio Shack, pay off the international phone bill, and then get a hold of Will Buxton through now that the phone lines are working. So he joins us now on the guest line. You will see and hear him calling the IndyCar race this weekend at the Thermal Auto Club in essentially Palm Springs, California, which I think is where we find Will Buxton currently, meaning it's early for him and he had to just jump through a bunch of hoops. So, Will, you got your calisthenics in for the morning. I appreciate it.
No worries. Thanks for having me. Yeah, we put a nickel in the machine and it seems to be working. I've been up since, don't worry about me, I've been up since 3 a.m. Jet lag hit hard last night, but ready to roll, man. This place is beautiful.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you about that. I was not there last year for the radio call of it. I will be there tomorrow is when I will arrive tomorrow. But for those that are unfamiliar, so Thermal is essentially a private auto club, right? For best way I always say it, well, a bunch of rich guys in California that want to drive their fancy cars around, and now they have invited IndyCar to race there. Last year it was an exhibition. This year, a regular points race. Your overall impressions, not only of the facility, but the challenges it might create.
I mean, it's impressive. It's really impressive. Do you know what? It reminds me a lot of Circuit Paul Ricard in the south of France. And this is the first time I've been to this part of the States. I flew into San Diego yesterday and stupidly got a car down here, which took like 4 hours. But the topography and the countryside, it reminds me so much of Southern Europe, like around kind of Italy, northern Spain, southern France. It's absolutely stunning. And then you get out to all these palm trees just down past Indian Wells near Coachella. And here's this racetrack in the middle of the desert. It's just astonishing. But yeah, really like Circuit Paul Ricard in that it's so new, it's purpose built, it's intended to be a challenge. You know, there's 3 separate circuits here which they've kind of combined to make one long Grand Prix length track. And that's what we're racing on this year. Obviously, we had the race last year, which was a non-points paying event that was kind of split into heats. But this is the first time that it's going to be a proper, 61-lap event. And I can't wait for it. You know, it's a massive challenge for everybody because nobody in the entire field has done a proper race distance here. So it's a huge step into the unknown. And when do you get that? You know, obviously we're going to get it next year with Arlington, but it's really rare that you get a new track on the calendar that no one has race experience of for that kind of proper duration. So I think for everyone, it's going to be a massive step into the unknown. But it looks like a real challenge, like those quick changes of direction out the back, the lefts into the rights, and the really quick kind of sequence of flowing corners up the top through sort of 12, 13, 14 down through there. It's a challenge, man.
Will, for you, your background, and I think most people know this, Will Buxton is our guest from, of course, IndyCar on Fox. You come over with a vast background, goes without saying, in Formula One. I thought you did a really good thing on social media. I in the last day, really, comparing for people that are trying to get to know IndyCar that are following you from the Formula One side of things of, hey, here's your F1 equivalent. Here's the driver that this is the equivalent of. To get, but it's perfect, right? Because you've got to be able to, I do this a lot in working in Indy and knowing that it's a niche sport of comparing it to like NFL teams, hey, this team is this, to give people, to speak their language, if you will. For you personally, and you've got one race under your belt. I know you've been around this series a lot and followed it, but if you will, for you, what are the differences or similarities between the two series, and what did you notice at St. Pete that you thought to yourself, that's why IndyCar's cool?
So the intensity of the competition is no different. Everyone is here with one thing in mind, and that is to win. I think the difference with IndyCar is that every team turns up every weekend with a genuine belief that they can and that they could. And that just doesn't happen in Formula One, with the exception of 2 or 3 teams who turn up and think, we got a shot of a podium this weekend. The vast majority turn up knowing that they're going to be fighting for points at best. That's not the case in IndyCar. In IndyCar, anyone on any given weekend can take the victory. You know, you need to look at the podium last time out in St. Pete. None of them were on the front row of the grid. You know, Palou came from 8th, Dixon came from 6th, Newgarden came from 10th. Like, they fought their way through, and it was a proper fight. So I love that nature of IndyCar, how sort of egalitarian it is and how open it is. And that openness is something that I also experienced in the warmth and the welcome that I received in St. Pete. Which was really a surprise for me, because I was hard on myself after my first call, because, you know, was it where I wanted it to be? Was I as good as I hoped to be? Nowhere near. And, you know, I'm always my own harshest critic, but the warmth of the reaction from the fans was something I never expected or could have hoped for in a million years. So, yeah, man, that's been a lovely surprise.
You know, it is truly remarkable in that race in St. Pete, and we talked about it on the show, Will. Will Buxton is our guest. The two storylines to me in that race in St. Petersburg that I think are going to be consistent over the course of the season. But Alex Palou, once he gets out into the lead, is such a tactician. He just does not miss a mark, right? Yeah. And then Dixon, and granted his teammate, but for Scott Dixon to do what he did without radio communication, I don't think people will realize how it's not as hard as trying to place an international call for a radio show, but it's pretty darn hard to do it without a radio, right?
No, this is it. I mean, let's put everything into perspective. You know, making phone calls is far harder.
That's right, as we know.
Yeah. No, look, what Scott did without the radio was astonishing. I found it really funny, though, that straight after the race, he's like, I didn't have a radio for the whole race. And then immediately they're like, oh, we needed a radio for the race. Otherwise, we would have been black flag. So they kind of quickly backtracked from the gravity of just how long he'd been driving without the radio. That was fun. But hey, you know what? Robert Schwartzman did the same thing in the Prema. His radio cut out halfway through the race. So you've got the greatest of all time, one of the greatest of all times in Scott Dixon, who we know can pull off crazy strategies and make them work, who is the master of making his fuel number work, going off experience and making that work. And to finish where he did, P2 in the race, you take your hat off and say it's, you know, astonishing job and something that only the rare few could achieve. But then for Schwartzman in the Prema, in his first ever IndyCar race,
I thought he fared well. I thought he looked like a guy that knew where to put the car, and that they had given him a pretty good stable car.
But no radio. So he's doing this with no experience, no knowledge of how to read that fuel number, not ever having driven an IndyCar race in his life, and still brought that thing to the flag, you know, okay, at the back of the field. But I think that was a momentous drive for him, and I thought that was really incredible. As you say, Palou, he just doesn't make mistakes. And the really incredible thing with him is, I think, when you look at his stints and how he pushed towards the end of the stints when that pit window opened, that's where he shows his brilliance. That's where he shows his class, because that's when he starts to push, and that's when he makes up the time, and that's where he was able to make up the positions and take the win and come into his own. He's an absolute force. But there are so many brilliant storylines just bubbling under the surface. Could Andretti have won that race? Yes. Should they have won that race? Absolutely. Herta was well ahead of your Palous and your Dixons, you know, having started on the soft, changing, you know, under yellow. He was in prime position to win that race, but the botched pit stop on that rear right ultimately cost him the ability to do so. And that's the one thing that Colton said Andretti needed to work on, needed to iron out coming into this season, was getting through and beyond those mistakes that have held them back in years gone by. Shank looked amazing until they kind of stumbled in the race. But if they can get their strategies right, and if they can not make those mistakes in pit stops, they look ominously fast as well. Penske, you know, McLaughlin, on any normal day with any normal strategy, that race was his. He looks phenomenal. They look, you know, absolutely astounding. I thought ECR had a good race. Dale Coyne in the top 10 for the first time in years. McLaren, you know, didn't have their lead driver where they wanted to be, but Pato coming through from 23rd to 11th, brilliant drive. And Lundgaard, you know, he hasn't turned up just to, dude, he hasn't turned up to make the numbers. Like he's turned up to lead that team and to challenge Pato. And he's still driving a car which is ostensibly created around Pato and Pato's needs and Pato's style. So to be able to pull out that kind of a result on debut for McLaren, lead the race, pull off that double overtake into 10, like, come on, the guy is serious.
Will Buxton, our guest. Before we let you go, Will, I got a couple of stereotypical British questions for you. You ready?
Nice. Yeah, hit me.
First, is it true that British people can instantly spot a fake British accent?
Oh yeah, 1,000%. The funny thing is most Americans. It's great because obviously my predecessor in the commentary box for IndyCar is Lee Diffie, and most people think that I'm Australian, and I think a lot of people think that Diffie's British, but
It's the other way around, right? Yeah.
It's the other way around. Yeah. Oh no, you can spot it a million miles off. Don Cheadle, for example, in the Oceans movies, worst British accent that you've ever heard.
But
I
the
think
other
he kind of
side
did
of it,
that.
though, is it, I hope I'm saying his name correct. Idris Elba, isn't that his name? That was in The Wire.
Yeah, Idris Elba. Yeah.
Idris
Really-
Elba, yeah.
really
and
good.
for that matter, Jimmy McNulty, the guy that plays McNulty in The Wire,
Yes.
they're both British or Scottish, and you can't
Well,
tell at
he's-
all. I mean, I
Yeah,
don't,
like McNulty is Prince Charles in The Crown.
Yeah.
So that's how British he is.
unbelievable. Like, so can you do an American accent if you had to? Like, if you
Don't embarrass me. I'll sound terrible. You know, like I think you can only ever do extremes. Like
That's fair.
I'm from the south. I'm from the south of the UK, which is a fairly nondescript accent. So if I'm going to do another British accent, I have to go right to the north and do Manchester or Liverpool. So
Okay.
if I'm coming to America and I need to do an accent, then it has to be a southern drawl because that's the only thing that you can kind of do because it's so extreme. But I don't want to alienate
Fair.
my
Very smart strategy.
new listeners.
Smart strategy. Okay, so it leads me to my other question. I always ask this. I find it fascinating. Maybe I'm the only one that does. For people that will never get the opportunity to go to England, you are from Portsmouth, England, which is in the south, if I'm not, you just said,
Yep.
okay? You've been around the United States a lot. What part of the United States, if you were to blindfold me, take me to England, take off my blindfold, I don't know how long I've been on the airplane, I'm disoriented, but I look around at the topography of Portsmouth or southern England in the countryside where you grew up, where would I think I was in the United States? What area of the United States reminds you of where you grew up?
Oh man, nowhere. But that's because everywhere in the US is so unique. You know, this isn't just a country. This is a continent, and every state feels like its own unique country that has its own unique vibe and feel and topography and weather. And I've never been anywhere in the States that reminded me 100% of anywhere in England. It's all unique to itself. You know, America is very much America. There are, it's really weird, but it doesn't remind me. There's no city or state in the States that reminds me of anywhere specifically in Europe or of anywhere else in the world. It's all so unique and distinctive of itself.
Okay.
It's one of the things I love about the U.S.
Here's
That's
the
a
most
politician's
important-
answer, isn't
that
it?
is. That between that and the no southern drawl, man, you're on a we're putting you on the ballot now.
Let's go.
Here's my last question for Will Buxton. This is I've saved the most important for last, selfishly speaking.
Okay.
In July, my cousin and I are going to Manchester to see 2 shows of Oasis. Are they going to come out and play
stop it.
45 minutes and completely punk all of us?
Could you just not? So I managed to get tickets to the London gig, and I was going with my wife and my daughter, and I like Oasis were my band, okay?
Totally.
And
You and me both, man.
when my eldest daughter was a baby, I used to sing her Oasis songs because I ran out of nursery rhymes. So I used to sing her Oasis songs to get her to sleep when she was a baby. And we went to see Liam Gallagher last year, and it was this beautiful kind of full circle moment where we're singing Supersonic at each other, and it was incredible. And we had tickets to London, and then I signed to come and do IndyCar for Fox. So I'm going to miss the gig in London. So
Now, Will, I'll tell you, I'm missing the Iowa weekend for it. So that's I'm going to miss the 2 races at Iowa.
You know what? Legit. Like that's
It's understandable, right? I mean, nothing against Iowa, right? Nothing against Iowa.
No.
We're playing politics here, but I had the chance to go.
I was considering saying to Fox, like, do you mind if I do the commentary from the gig? But I think I'll either lose my voice or lose my job.
So
Probably
here's the
both.
thing. I'll let you know how it is because I'll see you after. I'll see you obviously this weekend in the.
It's okay.
tent
You don't
there.
have to rub it in.
And
You
then-
don't have to
that's
rub
right.
it in. It's
So I won't
fine.
mention it. But on Carb Day, we're doing the show live from Carb Day. You got a packed Carb Day, I realize. After the practice on Carb Day, we're doing the show live in the Pagoda Plaza. If possible, I want you to swing by so that we can have everybody do a toast and we'll sing Oasis.
Okay. I have a travel guitar that I bring to all the races with me, so I'll bring that down and we'll have a sing along.
Hell yes, let's go. I'm all for it. Will, I
Done.
look forward to seeing you this weekend, and we
I'll
will
see you soon, man.
obviously watch hopefully a good race at Thermal. Appreciate the flexibility today.
Oh, absolute pleasure. Let's do this again anytime.
Will Buxton from Fox and IndyCar Television. I did not do number one. Guns N' Roses is actually my favorite band. Oasis is second, and number two, I didn't do my British accent. He'd have been able to spot it from a mile away. I'm fairly certain he could have. Tony East, by the way, coming up just about an hour from now, and Taylor Tannebaum, bottom of the 2 o'clock hour on this. What is it? A Thursday edition, Eddie? Query Company on the Fan. NCAA tournament officially now underway. Do we count the play-in games as the tournament?
Here's the thing.
That used to be first round, right? Now they've gone back to being honest, right?
Yeah, I don't think it's part of the tournament, even though it is called the Field of 68.
Purdue has a 2-point advantage over High Point. And Creighton all over Louisville at the half. They lead by 15 over Louisville. Eddie, have you done your Final Four?
Oh, yeah, it was due before noon today, or 12:15 Eastern.
Who is your surprise Final Four entrant?
Nobody.
You went with like just a completely, would you go all chalk?
I did go chalk just because I think the top 4 teams in college basketball are that good and that complete compared to the rest of the field. I took all 4 1 seeds. Last time it happened was the last time the Final Four was in San Antonio.
I mean that's not the dumbest thing ever, right?
Mm-hmm. But I will say I had Arkansas making a Sweet 16 run.
I have in mind.
And Michigan making it to the Elite Eight in one. There was one bracket where I had Michigan making it to the Elite Eight and losing to Michigan State.
I realize no one cares about any of this, but it is fun for the sake of the conversation just to throw it out there. I have the Final Four of, would you like to guess my Final Four, Eddie? I will give you a hint about each school, okay? The first Final Four team that I have, and I'm simply going by like the way the bracket, when I say it first, the first Final Four team that I have had at one time a shooting forward / shooting guard that was the first draft pick of Donnie Walsh when he was the Pacers general manager, who was a really good player, and people forget had great moments in Boston Garden representing the Pacers and was kind of Reggie before Reggie. And he came out of this school. This school also produced one of the most popular and polarizing analysts of the NBA and college basketball, who people claim doesn't watch enough college basketball, but yet they put him on the platform anyway to talk about it.
Thank you for that last one. That was more modern that I would probably get. Auburn.
Yes, but Barkley played the same era as Chuck Person. Matter of fact, he was before Chuck Person at Auburn. Okay, next. This school has a coach that was kind of loosely linked as a possible Indiana candidate, and their former head coach was, a lot of people thought, a serious Indiana candidate, and I was adamant that he was never even in the discussion. Indiana's most polarizing former coach later went to this school.
Texas Tech?
Correct. On the other side, this school was defeated by Indiana in 1987 in the NCAA tournament. They defeated Indiana in 1992 in the NCAA tournament. They are the richest and the bluest of blue bloods in college basketball.
That would be the Dookie Blue Devils?
That is correct. And then down below that, a school that surprisingly has never been to the Final Four. I think most people think of it as a football school, but they have a coach that I have a question about that has been keeping me awake at night with brain droppings for the last 2 weeks that I'm going to bring up in just a second here. But the most beloved athlete in the history of Indianapolis professional sports played at this university. Actually, arguably the 2 best professional athletes in terms of their career in Indianapolis, the 2 best athletes in Indianapolis, arguably, both played at this school.
They're playing right now?
I have no idea.
Okay, so that eliminates Purdue.
Correct.
Clemson?
The most beloved athlete in the history of Indianapolis professional sports played collegiately at this school.
UCLA?
The most beloved professional athlete in the history of this town and the most known athlete anywhere in the world that you mentioned that you're from Indianapolis in 2025, they
Tennessee.
immediately associate with Tennessee, yes.
Yeah.
Peyton Manning. And then, obviously, Tamika Catchings. I realize Caitlin Clark is here now. One thing that fascinates me about Tennessee, as I was watching Tennessee taking on Auburn over the weekend in the SEC tournament, and I've mentioned this before, but I'm going to mention it again. Rick Barnes, to me, is college basketball's Mac Brown. He's an older guy. He was at Texas, went to a Final Four. He's at Tennessee, has them as, has turned them into an elite program. They've been good all season long. Clearly, the guy can coach. but he doesn't necessarily look like a guy that you never get the idea when you're watching a game that he's some X's and O's tactician that's screaming out plays and making adjustments. And he doesn't look like a guy that when he walks into, there are certain guys, I've talked about this. When you're in high school, give me a high school in Indianapolis off the top of your head, Eddie Garrison, go boom.
Cathedral.
Okay, so you're at Cathedral. Jason Delaney's your coach, and you're Xavier Booker or whatever it may be at Cathedral. You're a blue chip 5-star recruit. You're the top 20 recruit in the country. And I know what this is like because when I was in high school, I played with guys that were Division I recruits, and this was before, rivals and 247 sports and all that stuff. But it was still a big deal. And those of us that were in the basketball program, it was in particular a big deal. You might have had this, Eddie, with baseball or whatever it might be, where when a college coach came in, it was like, whoa, it was a huge deal.
Yeah.
So you can imagine if you're at Cathedral and you're walking the hallways and you're friends with Xavier Booker and he's a big-time recruit, but you turn around after school on your way out and you bump into Tom Izzo in the hallway or Bill Self or, Mark Few. Any of those guys, Bruce Pearl, and you're like, whoa, and that's a bit like there's a persona about him, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't feel like Rick Barnes has that. Does Rick Barnes really have like swag about him?
Is it because he replaced Bruce Pearl?
Maybe, but he's been really good everywhere he's been. He was at Clemson, he was at Texas, he's been at 3 consecutive football schools, and built big time good basketball teams at football schools. But yet he doesn't have any sort of like an aura about him. But he's clearly a great coach. Now, Houston in the Midwest is really good.
Cougars.
They can guard, and St. John's also. I took Tennessee and Texas Tech over those two teams only because, and who knows, man, Florida will probably win their region, right? But there are two. St. John's and Houston are, I think, maybe the two best, or at least the hardest playing defensive teams in the tournament.
It's fascinating on the St. John's part of this because they don't shoot threes. Like, they just do not do it. They don't shoot it because they don't make them well, so they're one of the best teams inside the arc in the country. Kadari Richmond is really, really good for them. He's the spearhead of the snake for the Johnnies, and if they run to a team that's really, really good defensively and can contain their dribble drive penetration, I wonder if they're going to be able to make enough shots to win games. That's what concerns me about St. John's in the tournament.
Yeah, that's fair in terms of St. John's. Now, the other question would be this. If you did a tournament bracket of the best NCAA tournament moments, I guess you'd have to do it under 2 different ways of judging it. But if you did it a best NCAA tournament moment bracket, and you had to do it based on what are your favorite moments versus what are the ones that you think are the biggest. If you did it first off in terms of what are the biggest moments in March Madness history, and I mean the moments that, and there's an age bias that comes into this, because I think for a lot of people, it's their most reflective memories are the ones from when they were getting ready to go into college to like college age to immediately following. That window is when no, I'm telling you, that was when the tournament was the best. But if you made an NCAA tournament bracket of the 64 greatest moments in March Madness that everyone remembers, what would be, and it's hard to say, let me give this qualifier. Clearly, Chris Jenkins hitting the national championship winning shot at the buzzer theoretically would be number 1.
And everyone forgets about the shot that Mitchell Page hit right before that. He's up in the air, contorts his body to stay up,
Correct.
And he hits like a miraculous shot to tie it.
Clearly, Keith Smart's shot for Indiana is a huge moment. But those are that's not necessarily the madness. Because March Madness comes to just miraculous finishes that no one expected. When you get to the Final Four, you obviously are really good and either team can win. The Bryce Drew play, part of the madness of that is the fact that who in the world thought that Valpo was going to beat Ole Miss, which was like a 4 or 5 seed.
Bartley Dickinson over Purdue and UMBC over Virginia.
Northern Iowa over Kansas, those moments, right? But in terms of a single play or just a boom, clearly I think the most famous play in NCAA tournament history. And it defies what I just said because it's a team that has had plenty of moments that you expected to be there and everybody thought it. But when you talk about guys in forgotten plays before, Sean Woods of Indianapolis, who played at Cathedral and was a really good player, Sean Woods hit an amazing shot in the Spectrum in Philadelphia, off the glass, one-handed, and off the top of the glass. An amazing shot that theoretically allowed Kentucky, just like last night's Dallas Mavericks team, just like the Pacers in Minnesota, this group of players that the main line's not there. That Kentucky team, that was supposed to be Chris Mills and Sean Kemp and Sean Sutton and LaRon Ellis, and there was one other player, I can't remember his name. It'll hit me in just a second here that had to transfer out because he was deemed ineligible. They had this amazing recruiting class in 88 that were supposed to be, going through and then, red shirting and then having this miraculous run and whatever else. And then all of a sudden, the sanctions hit and Kentucky basically got, right on the cusp of the death penalty. And they go out and they end up hiring Rick Pitino. They get rid of Eddie Sutton. They end up with Rick Pitino. And they have this group of, Jamel Martinez and Richie Farmer and guys that were just, secondary level recruits. And Sean Woods was a big-time recruit for them. But for them to go up against Duke, Eric Manuel, thank you, was the one that was ineligible. Eric Manuel was a huge recruit. And so for that team to have Duke right on the cusp and theoretically knock out Duke, who had won the year before, who was going for 2 in a row, who had Christian Laettner, who was arguably the greatest certainly the greatest NCAA tournament player of all time, 4 Final Fours, all-time leading scorer in tournament history, going for back-to-back national titles. For them to have them on the cusp, and I was at the University of Kansas when that happened, and everybody's going, holy cow, Kentucky is going to go to the Final Four and knock off the evil empire in Duke. And that's what Duke was at that time. And then for Laettner to hit that shot, I think Christian Laettner's shot, Eddie, you tell me if you disagree, because obviously different era. I think Christian Laettner's shot is the most remembered moment in March history.
I would certainly agree with you there that when you started talking about making a bracket or whatever, I was like, well, the Christian Laettner shot can automatically go to the Final Four. Don't worry about filling out, a shot or a moment in that region.
Is Bryce Drew's shot up there?
See, to me, that one didn't come to top of mind.
Okay. Let me give you a couple of others. Danny Ainge linked to the floor against BYU too long ago?
Yeah, probably.
Okay, Bryce Drew?
What do you mean?
The Bryce Drew play. The Valpo play for Bryce Drew where
I
they
put
went
it up there.
the length of the floor, the Pacer play where they threw it, they make a pass, they hit the Bryce Drew game-winning 3.
Yeah, I would put it up there. I didn't know what you were asking. Sorry.
Oh, Lorenzo Charles, is that up there? The dunk for North Carolina State to beat Houston? A game-winning dunk.
Be.
Jim Valvano, Jim Valvano running around aimlessly looking for anybody to hug. That's probably a number 1 seed, right? Trying to think of other moments that Tyus Edney linked to the floor for UCLA against Missouri when they were down at UCLA, was down and out, and Tyus Edney goes to link to the floor and scores. That's why you watch it. That's why I don't understand the feeling of need or necessity by the NCAA to potentially add to the draw, to add to the tournament. Why do you need more teams? 68 feels like too many right now, does it not?
Well, and then you still get all these upsets, Jake.
If it ain't broke, right?
Yeah.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But I still think my favorite, for me, aside from, and I grew up an Indiana fan, so the Key Smart shot is obviously massive, right?
What about the Furman shot against Virginia
Huge.
from a couple years ago?
Huge. How about Maryland, Baltimore County against Virginia, right? How about speaking of Indianapolis guys? What about Kyle Guy? The one time that I've ever quote unquote gone viral was at that Final Four when Auburn was playing against Virginia, and I was in a bar in Birmingham because I was at IndyCar Barbara weekend, and I'm filming the end of the game because I thought, well, this will be fun. It's all these Auburn fans, and I'm filming it. And Kyle Guy misses that three, and this girl went absolutely crazy in the bar and is jumping up and down, and everybody's celebrating, thinking Auburn's going to the national title game. And then somebody's like, wait a minute, there's a foul. And this girl completely lost her mind. And I put it on social media and just said, like, hey, the Auburn in an Auburn bar or whatever. And it got picked up, and I mean, it went absolutely crazy. But then Guy hits the 3 free throws. Are you kidding me? Huge, right?
Can't believe that one still.
That was pretty awesome.
Talk about some stones.
This one for sure. Tate George, 1990 UConn over Clemson after the full court pass. No question. Oh, my buddy John just pointed this one out. I mean, Butler and the Gordon Hayward shot, kind of on the other side, but I mean, still. If that shot goes in, woulda, coulda, shoulda, right? Woulda, coulda, shoulda. If that shot goes in, it would have been pretty unbelievable. There is a player for the Pacers that has lived multiple now for Indiana, multiple one shining moments. But I have concern because it seems like the more that the light is shining, the less likely that moment may arrive. But if the light's shining elsewhere, he seems to step up and hit huge shots. And it happened last night. I'll tell you who I'm talking about, and we'll get you caught up on what's going on here in the opening round games of the NCAA tournament next.
pass to McCurdy. Oh, my! Oh, Chandler Thompson, how do you do? Oh, baby!
Brett, they said he jumped over an automobile this summer, and I always thought that 43-inch vertical leap was fictitious, but I'm not so sure now.
That might be my favorite, actually. Not the summer of '69, but that was the fall, or excuse me, the spring, I guess, of '90. And that was such a unique thing for Ball State and their run. It was great because, and a lot of people, if you ask most people who was the coach then, they'll tell you Rick Majerus. It was actually Dick Hunsaker. Rick Majerus had kind of gotten Ball State going, and then when he left, Dick Hunsaker took over. And that team with Chandler Thompson and Paris McCurdy and, Sean Parrish, Sidney Parrish's dad was on that team. I'm sure was on that team. But their run, I still remember, they beat Oregon State and Gary Payton. They beat Louisville, and then they got into the Sweet 16, and UNLV was theoretically invincible. UNLV they lost to Arkansas, I believe, early that year, but that 90 UNLV team with Larry Johnson and Stacey Augmon and Anderson Hunt and Greg Anthony, I think George Ackles was on that team. They were unbelievable. They beat Duke, I think 103-73. It was the largest margin of victory in Final Four history at the time in Denver. That team was unbelievable. And Ball State was, I still say to this day and will take to my grave, that Ball State at the end of that game, not only was there a foul that was not called, but late in the game, at the very end, there was a shot that Ball State hit that they had called a foul ahead of time, if I recall correctly, but there were two questionable calls down the stretch. They were as close to UNLV as anybody that UNLV faced that entire season, not named Arkansas. And that run was special because, I grew up an Indiana fan. Purdue that year, I believe, was the number one seed and got upset by Texas. I'm pretty sure that's correct. And Indiana got beat in the first round by California. So Ball State was carrying the flag for the state of Indiana. And, Chandler Thompson was an Indiana guy that had won the high school state championship at Muncie Central. It was just an awesome run. But also, I was a junior in high school, and that is peak year of interest level and fanaticism about college basketball, the NCAA tournament, and all of it. I mean, all of it was cool. Purdue has started to get some breathing room from High Point. That was actually fairly tight early on, and the Boilermakers now had opened it up to a 10-point lead. That is at the half. Creighton is pulling away from Louisville now. That game in the second half, and Creighton up 16. And Montana and Wisconsin just underway. Here's another question, Eddie. Give me schools that you only know of because of the NCAA tournament.
St. Peter's.
Great one, okay? Schools that
Abilene Christian.
That's a great one. They had an upset special a couple years ago over Texas, right?
Yep.
Okay. How about Coppin State?
Oral Roberts.
Oral Roberts is a good one. They're out of the Summit League, I think, right? For that matter, Will Wade now going to North Carolina State, but McNeese State would be one of them. I
thought it was just McNeese.
I think it is maybe now. It was McNeese State at one time.
Texas A&M Corpus Christi.
Florida Gulf Coast?
Yes.
How awesome would it be to go to Florida Gulf Coast? I remember when Florida Gulf Coast made their miracle run, the Sweet 16 run they had, Lob City, right? And that's what led Andy Enfield to end up getting the job at USC. He left to go to USC. What's that?
Was that Hunter?
No, Ron Hunter was Georgia State. Ron Hunter was at then IUPUI, then Georgia State. Now he's at Tulane. Florida Gulf Coast had Andy Enfield. I think I'm saying his last name correctly. Was correct, and they were just dunking on everybody, and then he took the job at USC. But that's part of the fun of the tournament too, and you have to realize that there are people probably all over the country that until 15 years ago never knew where Butler was, and that's why college athletics and the money that goes into these schools. I mean, look at Butler's national profile once they became a basketball power under Brad Stevens. Their applications went up, which means the competitiveness or the selectivity of admission goes up, all of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
in terms of competitiveness and selectivity, last night, I mentioned this earlier.
VCU?
Really good one. Great campus, by the way. It's right in downtown Richmond. It's very cool. Last night, late in the game with the Pacers, as they were sitting there, just Dallas, you kept waiting to go away. The Mavericks used 8 players last night. They had 8 players available. And you kept waiting for fatigue to kick in and for that to allow Indiana to pull away. And it never happened. And credit to the Mavericks. The Pacers did, I thought, a remarkable job in terms of their perimeter defense, but of pushing the guards, or for that matter, the ball handlers, because Dallas had at times their wings, handling the point, but of pushing the offensive set for Dallas very far outside of, even the three-point line. And I'm talking about late in the game, last 3 or 4 minutes. And what Dallas did really well is they basically would have 2 guys out on the wing, and then the other 3 were almost running, not a motion offense, but just like curling through the mid-range until almost like watching that, like a merry-go-round going around. And then somebody that's cutting into the interior, they were finding holes in where the Pacers were drawing away because they were trying to put so much pressure defensively on the perimeter that the Mavericks were making good entry passes and getting high percentage shots, mid-range shots or layups. And it was frustrating to watch for certain, but it started to pay off in the last few minutes of the game when Indiana's perimeter defense finally forced turnovers, or Dallas, just missed a couple of shots. And the Pacers found themselves in position to be in position. They had been down by as many as 7. They had kind of yo-yoed that lead or that margin back and forth. And then Andrew Nembhard goes to the free throw line. And I like Andrew Nembhard a lot. He's got a great mid-range game. He's a very good defender. He's a very smart player. And he's pretty understated in everything that he does. But he goes to the free throw line, and I said to the woman next to me, not Shannon, she was on my right. There was a woman and her son, really nice kid, sitting to my left.
So it wasn't your wife, Emily Longnecker?
No, Emily was at the game too, though. So
Cat
I said,
fight.
What's that?
Cat fight.
No, all good. So I say to the woman to my left, hey, I got a feeling Nembhard's going to miss this free throw. Because I was thinking about, for example, the Milwaukee game. He had 2 wide open threes, and he missed them. He had a late free throw in that game that he missed. And while I love Andrew Nembhard, it seems like when all spotlight is on him and everyone knows he's about to take a shot, be it a free throw or a three-pointer, that's where he struggles. But the other thing about him, if you look historically at his time in Indiana, which is his entire time in the NBA, it's when you least expect it and when you have checked off every other box and forgotten about him that he makes big plays for them. He did it against New York last year in the playoffs, where you're in desperation moment on the shot clock from 35 feet, and he hits a huge 3. He did it in Los Angeles as a rookie. He hit a game winner. And then last night, after he missed the free throw, he bails himself and the franchise out by hitting a huge 3. But in hitting that 3, he did it when attention was all elsewhere, because it was just like this flurry of activity. And they get a steal, and they're moving the ball around, and they do an outstanding job with their ball movement more often than not. But he was like their 4th option, and everybody knew it. Siakam was a better option. For that matter, Mathurin for shooting a 3 was a better option. Nesmith was a better option. And it cycles around to Nembhard, and they've got to get a shot up, and he hits one, and it was a huge shot and a huge play. And they managed to do what I was worried they were going to do, and that was give the Minnesota game back. You lose that game last night, and you give back the game that you got against Minnesota. And that was my worry.
Couple things here, Jake. Who had the bigger play of the night? And I think Siakam had 2, quite frankly. He had the the block that led to the Neesmith 3 that kind of got the momentum back
Correct.
and going for the Pacers. And then they get a steal and an easy layup for Matherin. And then I think they cut it to 4. Then you have the Siakam steal at the end where he steals it from, I think it was Max Christie. And then he gets it to Matherin. Matherin drives in, somehow kicks it out to Siakam. I don't know. His head was at the goal, and he passes it out to the right wing, and then Siakam immediately pushes it to Nembhard, who hits the 3. I don't know which of those 3 was the biggest play.
I mean, probably all.
Between the Siakam block, steal, and then the Nembhard 3. Obviously, the Nembhard 3 gives him the win, but you can't have that without the other 2.
It was a flurry, right?
Yeah.
Do you have Mark's entire call of it? Because there was a lot going on with that. And I don't mean from Mark's standpoint. I mean, there was a lot going on in the game. I mean, it was like, it was kind of dizzying to watch. Hit up Mark Boyle last night, Pacers Radio Network.
He made the second shot. It's a 2-point game, and now the ball's stolen. Siakam got it, sends it outside. Nembhard to Matherin, kick out to the top. Here's a shot for the lead, and Nembhard hits a 3 from out on the left edge with 14 and 7/10 seconds to play. Man, it seems like this is happening every night lately.
My, oh my. What a wonderful day.
Zippity doodah. Is that Eddie Gill with a little zippity doodah there?
Yeah, last week, the game against Milwaukee was Sweet Baby.
I knew that.
Yep.
Did you know, by the way, that in the Song of the South, there was an actor from the Song of the South, which is obviously the song that I isn't zippity doodah, zippity, that's from the Song of the South, right?
I don't know. And my mind, Jake, is still fixated on this college teams that you only know because of the NCAA tournament. Davidson.
Davidson's a good one.
Because of Steph Curry.
That's a good one.
He has that run there.
Okay.
I don't know if it's too recent. Oakland?
I think people know about Oakland because of IU Indy.
Okay.
But by the way, James Baskett, who was in Song of the South, and he's the one that plays Uncle Remus that sings Zippity Doodah. I don't know if people know this or not, but James Baskett is a native of Indianapolis who studied here in high school, then went to New York City, and that's where he was discovered as an actor, and he was posthumously given an Academy Award for his contribution in Song of the South, an honorary Academy Award, and as a result, he is the first African-American to receive an Academy Award, and he's from right here in Indianapolis, Indiana. So I always thought that was a cool facet of that. But no, back to the final point. Flurry of activity there late. I thought it was fabulous of Nembhard to hit that shot, but I'm worried about him in late game situations like the free throws and things like that. And while I think he's tremendous, I am beginning to wonder if he's the one area from the starting standpoint that they could just use more size at, that they just could use a little bit more from if there was one area, if I had to nitpick. But that is certainly nitpicking. Also, nitpicking something that happened yesterday with Indiana that did not catch my ear the first go-round. But it was pointed out, and I think it's certainly an interesting anecdote next. Away for the Counting Crows, which would be a fabulous show, by the way. Matter of fact, we have a couple of pairs to give away today, correct? This is going to be June 14th at Everwise Amphitheater, correct?
Yes.
And the Gaslight Anthem is going to be with them?
Well, it's a special guest, Jake. Are we supposed to be talking about that?
Sure.
Then it's not a special guest if everyone knows.
I don't think that's true.
I'm being facetious.
Unexpected guest or surprise guest would be.
Yeah, that's
surprise guest would be that we don't mention it.
Kind of like a surprise birthday party.
We know about that. Again, June 14th, Everwise Amphitheater, White River State Park, Counting Crows. We will give those tickets away coming up. We're going to do it this way right after we talk to Tony East. So midway through, probably about 2:15 or so, I've got a fabulous NCAA tournament question for everybody.
Ooh.
A trivia question in relation to the NCAA tournament. It actually, indirectly, is related to the city of Indianapolis as well. So it's live, local, and late breaking. We'll do that coming up in just a couple of minutes. Yesterday, and I mentioned this earlier, when Indiana introduced their new head basketball coach, Darren DeVries, yesterday from West Virginia, it kind of straddled when we started the show. We went on early yesterday. We carried the press conference live, and then, there's a lot that goes into live radio behind the scenes. I mean, I don't need to bore people with all of that. We have obviously a fabulous team that does that. I have the easy part, which is just talking into a button, right?
And being around me.
Well, like I said, the easy part would be the talking, right? But when the press conference was taking place, we were trying to figure out and navigate through the fact that we were on the air during a time that we weren't normally. So you've got to move a lot of things around. There's a lot of moving parts. But I was also listening to it as we both were to just try to kind of hear what was going on because we knew we were going to replay some of that. But it was difficult because it overlapped when we went on the air. And so then as a result, you couldn't go back and listen to it, right? So if you missed something the first go-round, for the 3 hours we were on the air, there was no way to be able to kind of go back to that. There was one thing that took place, and I find this interesting, not because in any way, shape, or form that I think that anything in terms of like a tampering took place. And it's neither here nor there because Indiana has their guy. But I found this interesting because there were some questions that were brought up by folks in West Virginia that I think actually can bring up some legitimate questions for folks in Indiana. Listen to what Darren DeVries says right here in regards to the courtship, if you will, of Indiana and facilitating for him to be hired as their basketball coach.
Yeah, and obviously the process, is the process on how it plays out. And, as you're going through their season, they were, very respectful of making sure that my focus continued to be on our team and certainly appreciated that.
Now, wait a minute. As you went through their season, they made sure that my focus was on my team. Well, why wouldn't it be? If Mike Woodson decided to retire with like a month to go in the season, and Indiana then hired a search firm to begin the process of talking to other coaches and figure out like who's available and who's not, and if Indiana had reached out to Brad Stevens, and I don't know that they had, or if Indiana had felt out Dusty May or talked to Ben McCollum or any, Bruce Pearl, whoever it may be, Chris Beard was never a candidate, and I'm just throwing names out there that at different points were brought up in the cycle. But the point being, what we know is this. What we know is that West Virginia and Indiana at the same time were playing in the Bahamas at the beginning of the season. Okay? That we know. And when they were playing in the Bahamas, and I'm looking at West Virginia's schedule here, Scott Dolson had said that they were very impressed by seeing what was taking place in terms of the way that West Virginia played in the Bahamas. They beat Arizona in the Bahamas, and they beat Gonzaga. They lost to Louisville. That was 8 games into their season. Now, The big conspiracy in all of this, or where it becomes a question mark, is Tucker DeVries, who is probably or was West Virginia's best player. After they played in the Bahamas, he played against Georgetown. That was their first game back after being in the Bahamas, and that was it. After that, he was out for the rest of the year, which allows him a medical red shirt, which gives him eligibility at Indiana this year.
With a quote-unquote shoulder injury.
Right. So did West Virginia know then? Did he know then that he was going to Indiana? I don't know that. But when he says that of they then allowed me to focus on my team for the rest of the year, I think what happened is there must have been contact in the Bahamas of, hey, we're really impressed by you. If we have a situation open, would you have interest? Something along those lines. But it's certainly the point to me from the West Virginia standpoint. I understand why you would be up in arms and thinking conspiracy. From the Indiana standpoint, the question to me simply is, does that mean that Indiana actually never talked to anybody else whose names we brought up? Or why would you, better question would be, if Indiana saw him in the Bahamas, were impressed by it, and apparently had some sort of dialogue, maybe not directly, maybe through an intermediary, but when he says they allowed me to focus on my team over the course of the season, that would mean that it was in his mind from something that was said with still basketball of their season left to play. And if that's the case, then why did Indiana hire a search firm? Because it sounds like they had their guy all along. The good news for Indiana is it looked like Indiana had a guy they wanted, and Indiana went out and got him.
But did they hire a search firm, Jake? That's the other element of this.
They announced they did, right?
Allegedly.
But bottom line is, it looks like Indiana, when people said what choice was he, it looks like a very high one, if not the top choice, which is good. Tickets to give away. We're going to do it at about 2:15. I have a fabulous NCAA tournament question for you for your tickets for the Counting Crows, but Tony East is next. Getting you caught up on what's going on in the NCAA tournament. Love this day, man. And tomorrow, by the way, Prime 47. Hope to see you there. We will be doing the show live from Prime 47 tomorrow. All the food with one ticket, one price, drinks, party-like atmosphere, Prime 47. Be there tomorrow from 12 until 3, and look forward to seeing all of you. Not often that we can take the show on the road, but we're doing it tomorrow.
Jake, are you going to miss me? It'll be, let's see. And you're out on Monday, too, so you won't see me Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or Monday. Are you going to be able to survive 4 straight days without seeing this beautiful face? And my bubbly personality?
I have a feeling I'll get by
and my
just
humor
fine.
and my wit?
Okay. I think I'll do just, I'll handle it okay. Yeah.
And my compassion?
Okay. Purdue leading High Point now by 6. They are being led, by the way, by the two forces you would think. Braden Smith, Trey Kaufman-Renn. Creighton with a 12-point advantage over Louisville. That game is late and winding down, so it looks like Creighton is going to advance. Montana leading trailing Wisconsin now, 29-22. And, Houston rallying back to tie up SIU. Now I take that back. SIU Edwardsville doubling up number 1 seeded Houston.
Upset alert.
Yeah, 4-2, by the way, in that game. Upset alert was on last night at the Fieldhouse. Dallas and the Pacers, the very short-handed Mavericks. It looked like they had it, and the Pacers with a furious comeback. Joining us now to talk about that and more, Tony East. Tony, I thought last night the Pacers were dangerously close to throwing away the goodwill that they had gotten in Minnesota and basically balancing that back out. But the question is this. What was different in the last 3 minutes of that game that we did not see them do for the rest of it?
Nothing, honestly. I can't lie. The second half, their defense was just awful, right? I mean, the Mavs spread. The game was played in a way that there were so many whistles and foul calls, right? I think both teams took near 30 free throws, and so that catered to a style of just, all right, space out some shooters, get it to a guy who can get to the rim and go, and sometimes he'll draw a foul and sometimes he'll score. The Mavs were doing that for much of the second half, and it was working, right? Really, really bad defensive second half from the Pacers. They couldn't keep drivers away from the rim. Miles Turner wasn't playing well, so they were barely playing him. Thomas Bryant's defense wasn't there, so they went to Tony Bradley for rotation minutes, and you couldn't fault them for doing that. So the Pacers could not get stops at all. But in the final 3 minutes, the difference was actually that, one, they could score. Benedict Mathurin was exceptional in the final 5 minutes last night. I mean, maybe one of his best 5-minute stretches of the year. And two, the Mavs tripped all over themselves in the actual last minute of the game when they had 3 turnovers and 3 missed free throws, right? The Pacers needed every bit of that kind of marginal stuff to go their way. They were down 7 with a minute to go, but the Mavs, for lack of a better term, vomited all over themselves, and the Pacers made every shot in the final minute. That was really the difference because their defense was rarely good to me in the second half.
Tony, I've been holding off on this for a while because I don't want it to sound like I'm not a fan of this player. But I'll put it to you in trivia form, I guess. If you look at the Pacers starting 5 and everybody's playing at full level, which of the 5 positions is the one that you think would be most in need? If you had to upgrade a position, it would be which player?
2 or 3 probably is the answer, but I don't know which one because they're both valuable in other ways.
I totally agree.
I don't know.
My point being this. I really like Andrew Nembhard. I love the way that he can defend. I love the fact that he can hit big shots like he did last night. There are a lot of things about him to like, but I wonder if he's not the one player that, and part of it's size, that's not his fault. I don't know what it is, but it feels like he's the one player where they're kind of getting away with playing with a guy that maybe elsewhere you could get 15% more. Am I totally off base there? I can't pinpoint it.
I think he's quite good. I mean, the games like last night in Minnesota, right? Those were his 2 best games of the non-Tyrese Halliburton available games this season, and lo and behold, it's the 2 that they won without him this year. Right? It's been a real struggle for them in his absence. And,
well, I mean, he wasn't on the floor for a lot of the Minnesota game, but yes.
But he played well until then. In fact, it's funny, like him and Gobert got ejected in the same play. And I was like, oh, that helps the Wolves. He was playing that well.
I actually did think about that, yeah. I don't want you to think that I'm saying I don't like – I mean, I think he brings a ton to the table. I just part of me thinks, does that position need to be 6'7"? And maybe that's unfair.
Yeah. Well, that's possible, right? Like size is better than no size, obviously, but he does fit very well with their star players, which is why they start him and why games like last night are, very telling when he doesn't have to do that role, when his job is to fill in for one of the star players instead and be forced to operate more in that way. But yeah, I think the way you phrased it, was it 2 weeks ago, last week, where he's like 6 or 7 out of 10 in a lot of stuff, but not like quite hitting 8 or 9 in any of the ways that the Pacers would maybe hope. And maybe some of that is just that he's size limited on who he can guard and how often. And some nights it feels like it's there. Sometimes it doesn't. Clutch free throw stick in everybody's brains that he's missed 2 this month that have been crushing, even though he made up, actually both of them ended up ending in Pacers wins anyway. So I've just always found him quite good, and the skills he provides are like exactly what you'd want from a 2-guard between Halliburton and Siakam, even though there are some games where you're just like, man, if he could get a little deeper on these drives or hit one more 3 or finish one more shot at the rim or just something. Like the conference finals games will always be what everybody talks about with him, right? 'Cause he was incredible in those games. I think that's how he always will be discussed until he gets a tick better at jump shooting or a tick better at attacking closeouts or whatever it is. And so it ends up feeling that way, I think, because of his size. He's more of a point guard size player that has skills that work at the 2. Will Purdue ever make a shot again, Jake? This is getting painful.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Purdue people are probably starting to panic a little bit, right? Purdue's up 6. They're fine, Tony.
Well,
they're
thankfully
fine.
they can make free throws, but they haven't made a shot in almost 5 minutes, I think.
Yeah, they're up 6. They'll be all right, hopefully. High points, high-flying offense, though, so we'll see what that means. Tony East is our guest. Locked On Pacers is the podcast where you can hear his work. Tony, in terms of Halliburton, I winced a little bit because I'm listening to the postgame show on the way home last night, and I heard Mark mention, that – and with Halliburton, it's been a couple of different things. When I hear back, that worries me because that's something that's bothered him, and that's the hardest to predict where things stand. What say you?
Yeah, it's the scariest injury, right? And I think he's seen back injuries in the past. He's been on the injury report with this and in other seasons, and maybe I don't know what his back prognosis is right this second, but the lower back device he wore early this season, right, even when he was playing, maybe it's just a thing that can pop up every so often and impact his availability or how he plays or things like that. And, yeah, it is always one of those ones in sports that when it's a guy that it pops up a lot, it's really hard to manage, right? And I wondered last night if it was a back-to-back thing, but I would think that you'd play him against the better team than the worst team. So it does make me think that it might actually be something that maybe he's got to keep managing, right? He just missed games with hip issues, and I'm sure that hip, groin, and back injuries all in the same season, right after a bunch of hamstring injuries, that's tough to deal with. So not only is it the hardest, I agree with you, injury to manage or deal with, given what he's dealt with this season, what's caused him to miss games or caused him to be limited, it's even more concerning in some ways, right? So they are fortunate that, in a way, this is popping up when they play 3 home games against tank-tastic teams. Thank you, Adam Silver, that they can win without him, but they've struggled without him. So it is both concerning for their short and long term, but also perhaps the best time for them to have to manage his back, if that makes any sense.
Are we going to see, and I realized last night was a very, very, very limited spot thing here, but still a guy that if you were to bring somebody in that had never watched the Pacers and you were to say, okay, one of these guys literally is still wearing a name tag so the player, so his teammates know who he is, I think it would be hard for people to point out that it's Tony Bradley. He looks comfortable out there. He does. Are we going to start seeing more of him in the rotation?
He was good.
I know.
Like in Minnesota, he was good, right? They don't win that game without him at all. He almost had a double-double, and he came in last night, and you normally think, 10-day guy, what's this? I was like, yeah, they should do this, right? He can hit the glass. I will say, I don't know where you were watching the game last night, if you were at it or not, but when he took the corner 3, I'm not going to lie, I winced a little. I was like, oh boy, what's coming? But he drilled it, right? Credit to him. We almost saw a TJ McConnell 3, Tony Bradley 3, TJ McConnell 3 sandwich last night, which would have been the most improbable 3 straight threes stretch I've ever seen. Yeah, he's good. He's playing good. He hits the glass. He's pretty mobile in the lane, and he's been finishing everything, right? We'll see if that part wears off because his shooting percentage is absurd so far. But I agree he looks comfortable, and I had questions if he would fit stylistically, right, with the way the Pacers play up-tempo, but so far he's fit in very well. He helped them attack a zone in Minnesota. I don't think of him as a zone buster. His defense has been fine, and he scoops up boards. I think he's played good enough to earn that third center spot the rest of the season. We'll see if the Pacers agree in a couple days, but I can't fault them for, especially in a game where Turner and Bryant were both struggling. They turned to him, and I couldn't fault them for it. It made sense to do.
Tony, you ever bungee jumped?
You are not going to believe this. I was talking to somebody about this yesterday, but no, I have not. And I said, why would anyone ever do this?
I don't disagree with that. I've skydived. I've skydived twice. Now, which do you think's dumber, skydiving or bungee jumping?
Bungee jumping, definitely.
Okay. Have you ever skydived?
When you skydive, you jump out with a professional, right?
I did both times, yes.
When you bungee jump, the professional just pushes you off a bridge.
But the bungee cord, and it also feels like the bungee cord might snap you in some way. But if you think about when you were a kid, for example, on a high dive, okay, or even like a cold pool, you stand and you look at it for a while before you actually finally make the plunge. Is that T.J. McConnell with every 3-point shot he's ever taken?
Well, the reason that is true and possible is because he does not get guarded out there, right? So he has enough time to look at his feet, look at the defender, decide is this really one he wants to take. And those are the ones when he's wide open, I think that's pretty much the only ones he should be taking. And he makes just enough of those that it's not the worst thing ever, but it always does feel like a basketball moment just because of how long it takes the whole process of wind up, realization, shot to happen, right?
It's pretty remarkable, right?
but I mean, again, it's not like a weapon, right? I don't know what he's at this year. It's probably, if I had to guess, 33% or something. But given where he was, when he got to Indiana, it is a pretty big growth in ability, his shooting.
Yeah, but again, last night, like you mentioned, I mean, it goes, it's always kind of a pleasure when he hits one. You're like, oh, okay, cool, bonus, right?
Yeah.
All right, Tony, tonight.
It's one of those shots, but I always feel like, it went in. That's great for the Pacers. They'll never complain about points. But the way he's getting guarded, I don't think the defense cares either. They're like, okay, whatever.
Fair. Yeah. All right, tonight against Brooklyn, we are looking for what, and does the fact that it's back-to-back change in any way, shape, or form the rotations or who we're going to see?
Yeah, they might need to go 10 deep again. When they played in Philly, they were on the first night of back-to-back before that huge game against the Bucks, and they went 10 deep that night despite struggling in the first half, and they went for a full 5 bench group that night. So, you do have to think about players like Jarris played last night, for example, and I wasn't sure he would. I bet he does again tonight against Brooklyn just because of that reality. So you got to be careful with minutes at this stage of the season, and this is, again, 3 and 4 nights again, and then guess what? Saturday's game will also be 3 and 4 nights, 5 games in a row where that's the case for the Pacers. They've just been hammered by games recently. So I do think they'll have to be cognizant of that, get everybody out there. And the thing I would be looking for is exactly what I thought was going to happen for about half the game last night. Can they just have a mature, easy win against one of these teams that wants to lose? I mean,
that's what
I turned to the – go ahead.
Yeah, no, they got up 16 last night, and I thought, okay, cool. They're going to be able to rest guys, and then Dallas just
yes.
Credit to Dallas, man. Dallas played hard. I mean, they just kept getting, high percentage shots and hung around and looked like they were going to get it, and then obviously it went the other way.
I turned to Dustin. He sat next to me in media row, and I think it was 48-36 Pacers at the time, and they had just scored, and Navs weren't making really anything. The Pacers' rim defense was pretty good. I thought, man, this is so interesting. They never have this kind of mature, well-rounded win against, not a good team, but an okay team late in the season like this when they're expected to win. And then the very next Pacers possession, Andrew Nembhard and Ben Mathurin got tangled up and threw it out of bounds, and then the Mavs hit a 3. And then the Mavs came all the way back. The second I said it, they crumbled apart. But they never have that kind of game, right? They've even said as much. Like last week in Philly, right? Jenny Busick had that thing on the broadcast that she talked about with those kind of games. So, I mean, it's not that meaningful to beat the Nets at this stage of the season. The Nets don't want to win, but the fact that the Pacers do routinely not look awesome in these games are not able to put together 40 minutes of what you expect them to do and win these games is maybe not concerning, but close to concerning, and a problem that they know that they have. So that's basically every game they play against one of these teams the rest of the way. That's what I'd be looking out for. Can they just show that needed maturity and not let it get close or dicey even when they are dominating for big stretches of the game?
Tony East, Locked On Pacers, Forbes, WTHR, a number of different areas. We'll have all the coverage for the Pacers and the Nets tonight. Appreciate it, Tony.
Yep. Thanks for having me, guys.
Tony East, by the way, in the time that we were talking with them, Purdue did hit shots. They'd stretched it back out to a 10-point lead. That inside of 10 minutes now in the NCAA tournament. Creighton is going to advance. They are leading Louisville 81-66 inside of 2 minutes to go in that game. Wisconsin and Houston, respectively, starting to pull away just a little bit. Speaking of the NCAA tournament, if you want to go see Counting Crows coming up in June at Everwise Amphitheater, then now is your chance. We have the first of a couple of pairs to give away that we're going to do today. 239-1070 is the telephone number. That's 239-1070. I have a fabulous. Now, you can't get angry with me if you don't get it right and you don't win the tickets, because I have a great NCAA tournament history question, and it kind of relates to the city of Indianapolis. To give away the tickets, you have to answer the question correctly. And admittedly, probably, I'll give a couple of guesses for the first person because I'll probably give out some hints here. Taylor Tannebaum going to join us coming up bottom of the hour, speaking of WTHR with Tony East. But I saw this the other day and I thought, is this real? And then I went back and looked at it and I'm like, holy cow. You don't realize it, but yes, this is real. I found it fairly fascinating. And so I thought that would make a perfect trivia question for when we give away tickets on the air. So Eddie is lining up callers right now, and then we will put somebody on, hopefully not make him a sacrificial lamb, because, I want this to be an enjoyable segment. And yesterday, what did we learn from it? We learned, actually, of the fact that we now have 21 on this program, and we have a banner hanging for this, 21 female listeners, which I'm very, very happy with. Okay. Do we have somebody lined up here? Eddie? I'm not sure if Eddie just gave me, I think, the hang on just a second sign. Where are we going, Eddie, first?
Well, Jake, we have 22.
Really? Female listeners?
Yeah.
Okay.
Donita,
how are you?
I'm fine.
Donita, are you a regular listener of the program?
I am.
Really? Did you?
Yes, every day.
Did you lose a bet?
No, I just decided to take a chance.
Okay. How long have you been listening to this show, Donita?
Longer than you've been on it.
Okay. But you decided to stick with it through the afternoon show, and you have not yet left. Okay. Well, I'm greatly appreciative of that. Is there anything you like or don't like about the show?
Well, I think sometimes you're a little pretentious, but, that's to be expected.
Do you know how hard it is to not be when you're as good as I am? Now,
I understand.
Now, Donita, that's, you realize that. Now, give me an example of my pretension. Is that a word?
I don't know if that's a word.
Thinking it's a word is a bit pretentious, is it not?
I think that is a great example.
Okay. Well, I apologize for those moments where that may come off. I promise you that hopefully, authentically, that's not who I am, but I totally understand it. Okay, Donita, here we go. I found this. Are you a big college basketball fan, Donita?
I am.
Okay. Who's your team of choice?
Well, right now I'm watching the Purdue game, of course.
Okay.
But I don't really have a team. I just really enjoy the whole atmosphere.
Okay, here we go. I was stunned when I heard this. The COVID year, of course, was the year that Baylor won the national championship, correct, Eddie? When everybody was playing like in empty arenas with fake crowd noise? Baylor won the national title that year. So if we take that year out of the equation, in terms of years where there were actually fans at the NCAA tournament, taking Baylor out of the equation, no team from west of the Mississippi has won a national championship since this one. Who, not named Baylor, was the last team from west of the Mississippi to win the national championship in college basketball?
UCLA.
That is an outstanding guess, Danita. I will tell you this, okay? I'm going to give you a hint here. They actually won in Indianapolis. They won the national championship game in Indianapolis, and it was the first and I believe only national title for this particular school. And the state itself is predominantly desert, but has a huge hole in the middle of it that people like to go visit.
Is it Arizona?
Arizona's correct, Danita. Yes. Yes. Now, Danita, I got a question for you. Danita. You ready?
Yes.
Yeah, who's pretentious now, huh? Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
I'm just kidding. Danita, I appreciate it very much. We will get your information, and Eddie will get you tickets. I hope you enjoy the concert on June 14th, and I certainly appreciate you listening to the show. Danita thinks I'm at times pretentious, Eddie, which is probably fair, right? I did ask what she doesn't like about the show, right?
Mm-hmm.
I did ask.
It opens yourself up to vulnerability. I can't say that word.
Vulnerability.
Thank you.
Yes. Arizona in 1997. That was a great Final Four. That was Arizona, Minnesota, North Carolina, and Kentucky. Fabulous game in the semis. Kentucky defeated. Matter of fact, I think the finals went to overtime. Kentucky, if I'm not mistaken, Arizona beat Carolina. That was Dean Smith's last game as a head coach at North Carolina. And Kentucky defeated Minnesota. That was the Clem Haskins team that blew the whistle, essentially, on the improprieties from an academic standpoint at Minnesota. Clem Haskins was never heard from again. And Arizona played North Carolina, went into overtime. Miles Simon was unbelievable for Arizona in that game. Mike Bibby was on that team. They had a good team, obviously, and A.J. Bramlett was one of their big men, won the national title. Taylor Tannebaum joins us next. I completely. You would think that I would know the better here. Thankfully, we gave the tickets to Danita because I forgot about Kansas. Kansas would be the one other team since Arizona. So and believe it or not, that stat that I gave you came from a network saying that.
Do you mean Baylor?
Well, Baylor, but Kansas has won the national championship also from west of the Mississippi since then. The stat that I saw, which was during a television broadcast, said that Arizona was the last team to win a national title from west of the Mississippi. I just not in a non-COVID year. But I'm like, wait a minute, what about Kansas? Kansas probably technically, who knows, with Kansas it may have been vacated. I don't know. But anyway, Danita won the tickets anyway, so I apologize for that. That's the good news. Taylor Tannebaum would be shocked to know that there was some sort of a confusion on the program. Joins us now on the always busy and available to be sponsored guest line. Taylor now with, of course, ESPN covering the ACC Network, and Louisville is in real trouble here against Creighton. But North Carolina is the team that I wanted to talk about, but we'll get to that. Taylor, how are you?
I am great. Good to hear your voice. Good to be on with you. Yes, Louisville has officially taken a big L in the first round in a game that should have never been an 8-9 game really for either team, which is ridiculous. But that's a story for another day, I suppose.
See, this is what always happens, though, Taylor. And whenever there are teams that when we on Sunday night jump up and down about like an injustice, and Louisville, absolutely, it's ridiculous. They were an 8 seed.
Yeah.
But then oftentimes you look at it after the fact and you go, well, you know what? And the same holds true for Carolina, because Carolina was the one that everybody was saying had no business getting in. And yet what they did in the opening round game was absolutely eviscerate their way through, right? And so over San Diego State. What has been the difference, we'll begin with that, for North Carolina in the last, let's say, 8 to 10 games versus the rest of their season?
They started playing more Carolina basketball, and Coach toyed with the lineup, and you got better play out of the post. Look, they lost Armando Bacot, and the big question coming in was what was their front court going to do this year? And Jalen Washington started to step up. Jalen Weathers started to step up. Then Alan Lubin basically turned into a nightly double-double machine. They just got better play out of their post play. And you knew kind of what the guards were going to do. You have RJ Davis, who's the reigning ACC Player of the Year. And granted, he's at the top of everyone's scouting report, so maybe not as statistically great of a season as he had last year, but he is such a leader on this squad. And Elliot Cadeau and Seth Trimble started coming off the bench, and they inserted Ian Jackson, the freshman, who's just explosive, into his starting lineup, switched him back to coming off. So there was just some toying with the lineup. Finally found the recipe, maybe a little later than people would have liked, and it turned into winning, 8 of their last 10 games and nearly storming back 24 points down against Duke in the ACC semifinals. But it was the difference between, a lane violation and them moving on to the championship. So I just think they finally found the recipe with Coach toying with the pieces that he had.
Where do things stand with Cooper Flagg in terms of two-part question, I guess, with him, his availability now and health, and then there's been some rumor that he could consider coming back next year. Your thoughts?
Okay. We can let's start with his health first and foremost. He did come out today and say, I'm feeling pretty good. We have a great training staff. We've been working through it. I'm back to 100%. And then Duke's official Twitter put out that he is available for Mount St. Mary's tomorrow. So expect to see Cooper Flagg in some capacity on the floor. Keep in mind, he's an 18-year-old, just turned 18 years old. They heal a lot faster than we do these days. So I would be hard-pressed to believe that he's not going to be on the floor in some capacity tomorrow. Even when he's out there, he makes this team significantly better. Do I think they can beat their opponent without him? Absolutely. So we'll see how much time he's actually on the floor and what that actually feels like. That's going to be up to the coach and training staff and Cooper. As for him staying, that's a very cute idea, everybody. He's not coming back.
Yeah, why would you, right?
Every 18-year-old college kid wants to come back. The idea would be amazing, and he would get a ton of NIL money, as he already is. But the money he's going to making as the likely first overall pick, trumps that. It's a business decision. In his heart, would he like to come back to Durham? Sure. But keep in mind, they have a ton of freshmen coming in, including the Boozer brothers, Caden and Cam. So I think they're going to be just fine without Cooper, but he's got to go. Come on.
Well, and not only that, but I would think that even if there was like a 5% chance in your mind, when you go through that, you go through that ankle injury right there and you think to yourself, okay, wait a minute. If this is my knee or this is my hip flex, now we're talking something totally different. So to me, that only reinforces you got to go, right?
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, that's what you risk is your entire lifetime of money, right? It's, like I said, it's a business decision, and one roll the ankle, one tweak of the knee, one broken wrist, and you don't know how that impacts your draft stock. So it's good to see him healthy. It's good to see that ankle that he rolled, it wasn't as bad as it, could have potentially been. But I hope everyone enjoys Cooper Flagg in the NCAA tournament because he is not coming back next year.
What's the best campus in the ACC?
Best campus. Okay, so we added SMU this year, and it has been such a joy to be going to Dallas and really the West Coast. Like, you cannot go wrong with Cal or Stanford's campus. They're stunning. But the best, college environment that you're going to find, and if Florida State fans are listening to me, I'm sorry. I know I'm that's my alma mater. I'm going to go with Clemson.
Really?
It's the
Let's
realest.
go.
It's on the water. It's quaint. It looks like a college town. Game days are amazing.
I mean, I love it.
Stadium, that Death Valley is great. Little John Coliseum, where they play hoops, is popping. All right. So I would argue Clemson. It's your typical Southern collegiate town.
You know what I like about Clemson?
Yeah.
Is when you're driving in on the state highway. Yeah, when you drive in the last stretch of the drive on the state highway, they have huge orange tiger prints painted in the road. I love.
Yeah,
I don't. It just seems cool to me. And it's just this little town. If you're in Clemson, the only reason that you would be in Clemson, South Carolina, is to be at Clemson University. There's nothing else there. I think there might be a laundromat. That's it.
There's not even there's not a Target. Like, when we go for game days and I need to run out and you got to go 40 minutes for a Target.
Now,
I like that.
Now, hold on. Now, when I go, and I'm assuming if I'm ever down there for a game and you're down there for the ACC, for ESPN ACC network, I always go to Tiger Town Tavern and get a beer before. I go in, I get one beer, and then I leave. Now, you can't come and have that beer, can you?
No, I can come afterwards.
Yes. Afterwards, then I go to the game and I have a hot dog and a Diet Coke, and then I stop and I fill up, and then I'm out. I go home. I got an 8.5 hour drive in front of me, right?
What about the Esso Club? I still have yet to go to the Esso Club, but it's a staple in Clemson. So next time we're both there, we got to hit the Esso Club.
The Esso Club's cool, but unfortunately it's on the opposite, I say town, it's on the other side of the stadium from the way in which I come in from the path that I'm coming. But it is obviously cool.
They cannot be bothered to go past that point.
I'm very, Taylor, I know this will stun you. I'm very regimented. Everything to me is very you know what I mean? I'm like, no. Same parking spot every time. I park in the same parking spot, same guy's yard. I know the whole deal. I mean, it's everything is very, very regimented with it.
Color me shocked.
I know. Well, what can I say? Hey, Brad Brunell at Clemson just got an extension. Yeah. How much of that is because of the fact that, and I don't mean this the wrong way, did Indiana motivate that? Was there, because his name, I really felt like because of his connections to Indiana and Scott Dolson, not that he was their candidate, but I always felt like he was kind of their safety school. And I know people at Clemson were like, no, he wants to be here. But that had to be in their mind, did it not?
I would think if you are any kind of person, and you are Brad Brunell, who is a great college basketball coach, you have to look at Indiana in some capacity just because of the history and what you can get done NIL-wise there, and obviously his ties to the state of Indiana. I think he wouldn't be human if he didn't at least let it cross his mind. I do think, though, Clemson is an incredible place to be employed. Graham Neff is an outstanding athletic director. Monetarily, regardless of where the ACC stands, Clemson's up there with the best in the country. And they did just reformat the ACC incentive, the initiatives for, money when it comes to viewership and all that stuff. So Clemson's going to be getting more and more money as the years progress. And I do believe, they're going to try to set him up for success. Do I think it crossed his mind? Of course. He would not be human if it didn't. But I do think that it probably, if it did come up, I think their higher ups, their athletic director, their staff would have said, look, let's come to the table because we do value you and we want to prove that to you. And when it's all said and done, look at where he is right now with Clemson. He's winning. So they had the best season in program history this year, 27 wins. And that's a big thanks to Brad Brownell and especially what he can do in the portal. So I think when it was all said and done, he's pretty comfortable where he's at, and Clemson's investing in him. And I think they proved that. If they didn't show that investment, I wouldn't be surprised if he would have ended up on that very, very short list.
Lastly, Taylor, you got to be honest. The last time that you thought to yourself, because, obviously after working at WTHR and then living in Charlotte, great city, you're native of Florida, you're now up closer to ESPN in the Northeast, and you're, on the road a lot. But the last time that you thought to yourself, I really miss Indy, was when?
All the time. All the time. I'm telling you, I miss Indianapolis all the time. And it seems crazy. I lived there for 4 years. It's probably the longest I've lived somewhere in a very long time. I miss it. Like, the Pacers are going through a great run right now. Like, I think about that. My dog Mitch is barking. He says, hi, Jake. He misses you very much.
Mitch is Mitch nearby? Am I on speakerphone?
Yeah, you're on speakerphone.
Can I talk
Mitch
to him real quick?
Next to me.
Hello,
Yeah,
hello, buddy.
Mitch.
Hello, Mitch. Hello, buddy.
Say hi to your Uncle Jakey.
Mitch is the best.
I mean, look, he's Indiana born and bred. He misses the Midwest too. I think about it all the time, and hopefully I'll be back this summer. I'm not coming for the 500, but I'll be back this summer.
All right. Well, we look forward to seeing you. You can come in studio. You're always welcome. And certainly I know you're going to be busy here during the rest of the tournament because Duke, North Carolina, and Clemson still carrying the flag for the ACC. Taylor, appreciate it.
Thank you, Jake. Call
Taylor,
anytime.
Taylor Tannebaum and Mitch, by the way, joining us on the program. All right, we have more tickets to give away. Is that right? By the way,
right.
this is a very fair question from Josh. Question: why would you drink beer after a heart attack? That is not healthy at all for the heart. Surprised someone would drink alcohol after a heart attack. That is a very fair point. Certainly something that I have talked about extensively with my doctor. Anything in moderation. I would agree that doing so to excess would be irresponsible. Fortunately, I'm on very good meds. I also had, and I do think that this maybe is a factor, that my heart attack was from a rogue plaque blockage clot of my heart as opposed to anything degenerative that is kind of 6 to 1, half dozen the other, I realize. But it's a fair question from Josh, and I think anything in excess is dangerous, but anything in a responsible moderation, in particular after talking to a doctor and in factoring in the rest of the course, that would be my answer there. But a fair question and one worth asking. Tickets to give away for Counting Crows. We'll do it next. So Purdue, it's not poor old Johnny Ray. It would be poor old High Point. Looks like Purdue is going to advance the Boilermakers inside of a minute now with either a 9 or 10-point lead. So they are going to avoid disaster. It was never really in doubt. A couple of times High Point got it within 5 or 6. But that happens now. I mean, in the NCAA tournament, you get teams that are senior-laden or from smaller schools that have played together for a while. The Boilers up 11 now inside of a minute. Wisconsin over Montana by 7. That game early in the second half. At the half, Houston pulling away now from SIU Edwardsville. If you are curious where that is right on the other side of the river from St. Louis. 52-24. Houston leads that game at the break, and Creighton has knocked out Louisville. 89-75, Greg McDermott's Blue Jays moving on. Battle of birds there, by the way. The Blue Jays and the Cardinals. Now, Eddie, we have 2 more pair of tickets to give away. Is that right?
Yeah, 2 pairs, Jake, of tickets to give away.
2 pairs of tickets.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And we're doing that at 239-1070. Is that right?
That is right. Bill's been waiting patiently for a while.
Should we get Bill some tickets?
Yeah, a little get to know your listener if Bill's still alert.
Bill, how are you?
Hey, I suffer from pretension deficit disorder, so I'm doing fine, man.
You know, if with my pretension, if I was hyper energy, I guess I'd have hypertension, right?
Exactly right.
You know what I mean? Now, Bill,
Hey,
we've known each other a little
you
bit.
take,
Do you consider me pretentious?
No, I don't.
Good. You know me, so that's good, right?
Yeah. I never have thought that.
Well,
As a matter of fact, since we're playing get to know your radio person and everything, I've always thought that was kind of an act.
but, well, you know, hey, what can I say?
That's a compliment. That's a compliment. So,
well, I appreciate that. So, what's going on, Bill?
well, I just wanted to point out something that has always kind of riled me. I think it was the 1973 men's NCAA tournament when Bill Walton from UCLA and Steve Downing from IU.
Yeah, the foul was on Walton, and they called it on Downing, right?
It was, and I just invite people, if they can find that on YouTube, it was just the worst homer call in the world as far as I was concerned. I thought that was just terrible, and that could have put a damper on Johnny Wooden's reign as perpetual champion, and really kickstarted Bobby Knight's career off.
You know,
because that was
I'll tell you
really
something, Bill.
inexperienced team they had.
Here's what's funny about that. And, Bill, hang on the line because Eddie will get your info and we'll get you the tickets. The funny thing about that is when you realistically think about it, Indiana that year, because that was in the Checker Dome in St. Louis, they called the foul. Downing fouls out. They go on to win it. UCLA had to play Memphis in the finals, and that was Walton had arguably the finest performance in Final Four history in that game, 21-22 from the floor, if I'm not mistaken. But that 73 team, if they win it, and think about if McGinnis had stayed, but nonetheless, if they win it in 73, then and if May doesn't get hurt in 75, then theoretically you have Indiana winning 3 or 4. And, obviously Knight's record speaks for itself. But, yeah, you could have had the dynasty would have absolutely shifted. Drew was the other one. Is that right, Eddie?
Yeah, it's the second night of a back-to-back. He was the second caller, and Andrew Nimhart hit the game-winning.
Look at you, how it all works full circle. Hi, Drew. How are you?
Good. How you guys doing?
Good. Drew, you sound like a nice fella. Can we do a little get-to-know your listener here in the final minute? We've had a lot of success. Kids love this segment. Do you mind?
Yeah.
Drew, if you don't mind me asking, what was the athletic nickname of your high school teams in, like Wildcats, or your high school's mascot was what?
Fruitport Trojans.
Excuse me?
Fruitport Trojans out of Fruitport, Michigan.
Fruitport or Fruitport?
Fruitport.
Spell this.
Trojans.
Spell this if you could.
Fruitport.
Now, if you don't mind me saying so, Trojan seems like a very dangerous mascot when you're talking about Fruitport. Does it not?
Yes, it does.
Who was the marketing company behind this brilliant idea? Now, if you don't,
I don't know.
You've lived in Indianapolis now for how long?
Going on 15 years.
And you like it here in Indianapolis?
I love it. West Sider, Avon, going on 5 years now, and wouldn't call any other place home.
And your teams then, and was it work that brought you down here?
Work brought me down here along with my wife.
Okay.
So we're both from Michigan originally, so we are Michigan fans.
And you're Lions fans. What are your teams? Pistons. What?
We are Lions fans as well as Colts fans. Father is a big Colts fan. So.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, Counting Crows, since you are, I'm not going to say new to Indianapolis, you've been here 15 years, but there are a few things that are better than a summer night listening to music downtown Indy. You're going to be doing exactly that on June 14th. We will send you to Counting Crows. JMV has walked in.
Counting Crows, ever tell you the story about me and Adam Duritz taking a whiz next to one another at Johnny Depp's Viper Room?
Oh, the Viper Room, that's
that's where River Phoenix died on the sidewalk.
Shut it down, yeah, right there on the sidewalk.
OD'd on the sidewalk out there. But, yeah, I was in there on like a random middle of the week back in 1996, and I was in the urinal, and people were snorting coke and stuff in the bathroom and stuff, and it was a kind of a surreal event. And this is all when August and everything after, I think, had just been released, and Mr. Jones was a big deal.
What year was this again?
94, 95.
That had to be, right around the time that River
something
Phoenix.
like that. Yeah, it was
when did River Phoenix die?
Mid-90s. I think it was after River Phoenix. For sure it was after. But we were in stand-up urinals right next to one another. I didn't know he actually worked there, too. I think he did some jobs there for the hell of it.
Viper Room just closed. Last year when I went for the IndyCar race in Long Beach, I went past the Viper Room and literally, I took a picture of it, whatever, and it closed. I don't know if it went out of business, closed, whatever, but it's done now, right? The Viper Room?
I think so. This is a true story. The cover charge is $25, which is a little robust midweek. They saw my Indiana ID, and they charged me $50.
Well, hey.
That'd be $50, please. But L7 was on stage at the Viper Room. Remember L7, the all-chick group?
Yes, L7
Let's pretend that we're dead. I'll play that coming up on Saturday night on B. It's a 90s
L7
night.
was recording a video when I was an intern at MTV in the studios at MTV in New York. They were recording a video, and Courtney Love was there, as friends with them, and she was sitting there. I was an intern, and a video, the MTV heart-shaped box video came on the closed-circuit television. Courtney Love asked me to change the station. I didn't know how to. I was like, well, I can't do that. I didn't realize who it was. It was 6 months after Kurt Cobain had died.
Actually, probably looking like some strung out.
She called me the
hag.
4 most profane words that one has ever called me in my life.
Yeah.
She was not pleased.
Yeah. Were you disgusted did you go? When you finally noticed that's who that was, you go, oh, man, really?
Well,
that's what I felt about.
I walked down and I said, that woman down there's really angry at me, and they told me who it was, and I said, well, that makes sense why she was upset.
That's what I felt about Kate Hudson when I saw her with Chris Robinson and Black Crows at the Speedway. I went, man, really?
She was chain-smoking American Spirits when
oh, my. Well, it looked like she hadn't showered in 3 weeks.
Correct. Well,
which could be cool.
Which is 4 months more recently than he had.
That was more recently than Chris Robinson had showered, I guarantee you that. But actually, Chris Robinson was on with me one time. Was awesome. Great guy.
Was he?
I expected.
I saw them last year, and they were awesome. Last year I went and saw them, and they were dialed in, and they were awesome.
Because Gorman's cousin Steve used to be the drummer. They had it out, I think, but he was really. Both Robinson brothers were on. They were really, really cool. Boilermakers moving on. Jake,
Boilers are moving on, and Louisville is not.
Woo!
John will keep you updated on what happens with the NCAA tomorrow. By the way, Prime 47 noon until 3. Going to be there.
That's going to be awesome.
Would love to see you folks there.
Yes.
Absolutely. So we're taking it on the road tomorrow. Hope to see you there. John's up next, and I thank you for listening to Query & Company.